Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this NLA webinar, Building Hospitals with a Shift in Perspective. I'm Barbara Casey, Program Director at New London Architecture, and today we're going to hear from 6 projects from across the capital that show new approaches to hospital design. We believe that now is a critical time for redefining and championing the value of good design in the healthcare sector, and we are glad to show some great examples of this today. Today's project showcase is part of the NLA year-round education and healthcare program, and I would like to thank our program champions, Bidwells, Creative Places, Pranoy and Prasad, Perkins and Will, and Stan Hope. Before we start, I'd like to remind the audience that there will be an opportunity to ask questions to our speakers to the end of the session, so please do post your question through the Q&A function. And I'm glad to introduce our first speaker, Ruth French, Associate at Ryder Architecture, who are going to present the Whipps Cross Master Plan. So Ruth, over to you.
Thank you, Barbara. Hello, everyone. So thanks for inviting me today to talk around the Whipps Cross redevelopment project. So if we can have the next slide, please. As many of you will be aware, the government has recently committed to fund 40 new hospital construction projects. The redevelopment of the existing Whipps Cross Hospital is part of that first batch, and we're currently progressing an outline business case. Whipps Cross is located in the London Borough of Waltham Forest and is part of the Barts Health NHS Trust Group, which operates 5 London acute hospital sites. The hospital at Whipps Cross serves patients across Waltham Forest, Redbridge, Newham, and parts of West Essex. I can go on to the next slide. This shows the site in the centre of the image and is adjacent, showing that it's adjacent to the south of Epping Forest. The site is approximately 17 hectares and can be described as its own little island sitting amongst a number of local neighbourhoods and which are centred around transport hubs. The vision for the project is not only to provide a modern exemplar hospital, but to establish an integrated health and wellbeing campus, which includes new homes and local community facilities. So moving on to the next slide, this shows an aerial photo of the current hospital estate outlined in red. Over 43% of the hospital predates the NHS, and so there's significant maintenance challenges, along with the sprawling layout is presenting significant risk to patient safety, accessibility, and operational capacity. The original Edwardian West Ham Infirmary is the red buildings that are located in the centre of this image. This has somewhat been enveloped by the hospital as it's expanded over the last 100 years. The area shown in blue is made up of a former nurses' accommodation site and surface car parking, which has been relocated to allow for the construction of the new hospital. This will allow the existing hospital to maintain operation while the construction of the new hospital takes place. As shown in the next slide, there's an early concept image which shows once the new hospital is built, the rest of the site is to be redeveloped. The concept around this redevelopment is a hospital in a garden and a garden in a hospital. The vision draws on the qualities of the neighbouring Epping Forest, bringing the landscape into the site, connecting the hospital and residential development, including retaining elements of the Edwardian hospital complex. Moving on to the next slide. The master plan vision is built around these core principles. Focusing on the hospital itself, however, the redevelopment will continue to provide the same core services as it does today, including A&E and maternity. It will be delivered in line with the NHS key priorities, and I'll quickly run through these on the next slides. The first is the decarbonisation of the NHS, delivering new hospitals which are at the highest level of sustainability. Delivering this net zero carbon strategy is only part of this wider sustainability charter though. Patient wellbeing, landscaping, waste and travel are all important too. The next slide is a second priority, delivering modern methods of construction. The challenge is to carefully balance between the needs for future flexibility and adaptability, site constraints, contractor procurement, and whole life carbon targets. The next slide, however, shows that we do have already a strong MMC approach in the healthcare sector, demonstrated here by Ryder's Dumfries and Galloway Hospital project. Moving on to the next priority, the delivery of a standard platform, building on the P22 repeatable rooms and designing around flexibility and a simple structural grid. Whipps Cross Hospital is designed as a compact solution, minimising travel distances around the building and providing close connections between departments. The lower floors of the building form the technical podium, including A&E, outpatients, imaging, theatres and maternity, with 4 standardised ward blocks which sit on top. In light of COVID, both the design and clinical strategy responds to future pandemics, including options to subdivide the hospital and areas which can easily be adapted to allow for surge capacity. The last key priority on the next slide is the digital transformation of the NHS. A small positive from COVID is perhaps the acceleration of virtual appointments. The ultimate aim is to keep people from having to visit the hospital in the first place. But when they do need to visit, use of technology to aid patient pathways, record and monitor patient health and connect into external partners is all supported through a robust ICT infrastructure. On to the next slide. I was asked to touch on engagement, and given the last year, a segue from the digital strategy to engagement seems rather appropriate. Despite challenging times, the passion by Bart's and the design team make every effort to bring the staff, patients and local community on the journey has been quite exciting. Admittedly, the vast majority of this has taken place in a virtual form through the use of digital platforms and telephone conversations. The programme has included engagement with staff, service users, protected characteristic groups, public meetings, focus groups on key themes, outreach to local schools and community groups, digital surveys, virtual whiteboards. We've done everything we possibly can, and the programme will continue right through the project. We're only at the beginning. The next slide shows the current hospital as it stands. It's shown in blue, set next in its surrounding neighbourhood context. It's a big development, so careful consideration has been given to how this mass is broken down to a scale which relates to the master plan plots and the existing neighbours. The image starts to show the landscaping wrapping around the building, but also vertically, showing ward floors and key departments, which provide external terraces which can be used for visual amenity and breakout for staff and patients. Moving on, quickly have a look at the ground floor plan, which is showing kind of the various routes for dedicated maternity drop-off and blue light routes. I'm conscious of time, so I'll move on, and possibly the next slide as well, we'll skip. Moving back to the illustrative master plan and showing the hospital in the bottom left-hand corner of the site. There's a green spine which runs along the bottom of the site, which we've nicknamed Fullybrook Lane, which reflects a culverted river which runs beneath the site. The ponds shown to the right of the hospital are being designed as part of a critical drainage area, in order to mitigate existing local drainage and flooding issues. The second new key green space is a park nicknamed Chapel Park, created around the retained chapel from the Edwardian Hospital. The new main entrance to the hospital is located directly off this new park, and there'll be a number of local amenities proposed around this, including restaurants, convenience stores, fitness, nursery and co-working space. There's also plans for further community health services. The residential development will include a dedicated later living development and a housing mix in line with Waltham Forest's planning policy. The next slide, I mentioned the retained heritage, and this side is a lovely old photo of West Ham Infirmary, surrounded by its landscape and ponds. The top right image is the reality. Today, the building is expanded beyond recognition. We hope through the master plan to be able to peel back and bring back to life the key features of this heritage building and set it back into its parkland. My last few slides touch on the landscape vision for the site and reflects on how we're able to create a diverse range of green spaces, from wetland to enhancing the native ancient woodland of Epping Forest. The next slide is the aspirations for Chapel Park. Reflecting on health and well-being for the site, it includes a 2-kilometre walking trail around the whole of the Whipps Cross site and provides areas for children's play and outdoor exercise. Opportunities for sustainable urban drainage are also important. And going on to the next slide, the largest of these, of course, being the Phillybrook Linear Park. And so that is me. That's my 8 minutes, I think. So my final slide just shows kind of the massing as it stands at the moment. I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to questions later.
Thank you so much, Ruth. It was great to hear more about this project. And now on to our second presentation. We have Eleni Macri, Associate at Stanton Williams, who are going to present the Zayed Center for Research. So Eleni, over to you.
Thank you, Barbara, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk about the Zaid Center for Research, which has been a very unique project. It's the world's first pediatric center for research and treatment of rare diseases, and it's a building about making connections not only within the community inside, but with the wider public as well. It has reimagined clinical and research environments as a shared urban experience. And that connection with the context is especially important as it links the wider society with the significance of the work. Next slide, please. I'd like to start with this photo of Mark Titchener's work, which is the first thing one sees when they enter the building from the street. And it really summarizes the essence of the building and the incredible work that takes place inside. Next slide. Too often, healthcare and research buildings respond to clinical needs becoming too technical and sometimes disengaged from broader issues of human experience and well-being. And the challenge for the whole of the design team was how to reestablish some of these lost connections between healthcare and well-being, whilst also making a public statement. So we approached the design from the human and social requirements of those who use and experience the building, and not just from clinical and research needs. And these drawings that were done by the children at the hospital really depict this need in a rather lovely way, I think. Next slide. The project also has a unique site. It's located opposite Corms Fields. And for those who don't know this, next slide, it's the former site of the Foundling Hospital, which was dedicated to children's well-being and has become a living symbol of children's welfare for over 250 years. Next slide. And this offered us a great opportunity to design a building that has a direct relationship to Corms Fields, which you can see highlighted in yellow in this model photograph. Next. The project is best explained in section, and in a way it's a layer cake of various activities with lots of complexity in bringing all the differing functions together. So starting from a double height laboratory at the lower ground floor, which engages directly with the street. The ground and first floors are largely occupied by outpatients department, and the floors above are dedicated to research workspaces. The very top volume is a highly specialized lab facility that is used to develop treatments at the genetic scale. And in fact, it's one of Europe's largest facilities of this type. Next slide, please. So the experience of the building is very much about the interaction of these different activities and also the interaction with the outside. So having good views out and good daylight in are both fundamental elements for the well-being of staff and patients. Next. In particular, the connection to the public realm and that idea of being aware in the street of the activity that takes place inside of the building. It was a central concept for us, and you can see this in an early sketch that we did looking from the street through the double height lab and across to the outpatients department. Next. Now this is the facade that faces Corms Field, which is made out of a series of terracotta fins that give a certain civic quality to the building. Next. And what they do is that they screen certain activities and reveal others, not only the double height lab, which you can see here, but next, please, but also the large outpatients waiting area on the first floor. Next slide. There is a single shared entrance through a glazed bridge over this double height lab with the main reception straight ahead and the outpatients to the right-hand side. Next. You can see it in this photo and the views that visitors would have down the principal lab where young patients and their families can observe science in action, bringing them closer to the research that will ultimately benefit them. Next, on the other side of the bridge, we have Mark Titchener's work. Next. Views out from the lab are equally important, connecting the researchers to the public realm and the activity at the ground floor without actually being distracted from their important work. Next. The building throughout is characterized by warm, tactile use of material and a non-clinical sense of space. And this was a very important aspect of the brief, which extends into the outpatients department itself. Next. So the planning of the outpatients was key, and we placed all clinical spaces to the center of the plan with back-to-back examination rooms and support spaces, and all the primary waiting areas are on the perimeter of the building, benefiting from good daylight and direct views to the outside. Next. And here's the view you would get from one of the waiting spaces over to Corum's Fields. Next. The brief also asked us to create a calm and dignified environment which didn't condescend to children. And the resulting environment is activated by the children with various events that take place throughout the year. And the artworks that have been led by the hospital's arts department. Next. And here you can see the interactive installation in the central atrium space by Random International called Kinds of Light. Next. You see it in the main atrium again here, the building, and this space connects all the different activities visually. Next. And also clarifies how people will be moving across the building through generous staircases, allowing for chance encounters and interaction between the different branches of research. Next, moving up to the more private floors occupied by research and write-up spaces. Next. And lastly, at the very top, where we have the more isolated world of the specialist lab environment. Next. I'm going to end on this view, which shows the layered arrangement of different spaces and the labs in the setback volume at the very top of the building in contrast to the illuminated space that draws you in at ground floor level. Next. And it's actually been 1.5 years since it's been completed. And the vision behind this project seems even more relevant today as to how we could be reimagining clinical and research environments that could be part of our urban experience. And it's extremely humbling to know now that the building is playing such a vital part in global research and is life-changing to so many. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eleni. Really great project. And now on to our third presentation. We have Ewan Graham, Healthcare Sector Lead at Hawkins Brown, who will present the UK Institute for Dementia. So Ewan, over to you.
Thank you, Barbara. Hello, everybody. We can move to the first slide, please. My name is Ewan Graham. I'm an architect at Hawkins Brown, as well as leading projects. Also, I'm the Healthcare Sector Lead. As the title suggested, I'm going to talk you through today our project for UCL, UCLH, and the UK Dementia Research Institute. Next slide, please. Before we talk about the architecture, I thought it might be useful to provide you all with a little bit of insight into what dementia is. Dementia is a blanket term used to describe a range of progressive and degenerative neurological disorders. People with dementia lose their ability to think, remember, and reason clearly. Living with dementia affects patients physically and mentally. Next slide, please. On this slide are 7 of the most prolific and recognizable neurological disorders that can cause dementia. Now for the difficult bit. There are no known cures for these illnesses. Next slide. It's estimated that over 6% of the population in the UK are directly affected by dementia, either as a patient or a caregiver. It's in this context that the project I'm here to talk to you about was conceived. Next slide, please. UCL and UCLH have always worked together, and this project combined forces to create a new centre for excellence in neurology and neurological therapy. The diagram on the right shows how we conceptually responded to their brief to create a centre that houses basic scientific research, clinical therapy, and creates a headquarters for the newly formed UK Dementia Research Institute. Collectively, their focus will be to identify the root causes of these horrific illnesses, to innovate and find potential treatments, and to implement them in a clinical setting. Next slide, please. The site is located on Grayson Road at the former Royal Free Hospital and the Eastern Dental Clinic. It's within walking distance of 3 major train stations, the wider Knowledge Quarter, including the British Library, the Francis Crick Institute, UCL's campus, UCLH's campus, the Wellcome Trust and the British Medical Association, as well as a developing centre of gravity around King's Cross. Crucially, it is also only a 5-minute walk from the historic home of neurology in the UK, Queen Square, and the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery, which is shown in the bottom marked QS. Next slide, please. As you can see from this site, the site occupies a prominent part of Gray's Inn Road, and if we click to the next slide, has historically blocked the clear path between Gray's Inn Road and King's Cross Road as the NHS piecemeal development occurred. This is totally at odds with the wider historic context of Bloomsbury, which, as many of you may know, is defined by a recognisable daisy chain of quiet public parks, squares, interconnected urban walking routes. Next slide. So I guess one of the first things to challenge in terms of shifting perspectives for hospitals is about approach design from an urban perspective and be generous with the public realm. For example, how can we retain useful, valued or historic buildings within our proposals? How can we create new public realm and routes that benefit the city, the borough or the community? And how might we plan spaces around our hospitals to enhance how healthcare settings work by putting symbiosis with other departments, other researchers and industry? Next slide. With that in mind, I'd like to show you some of what we've proposed through the lens of creating genuinely open public space and why that's important. Breaking down the boundaries between science, research, medicine and public awareness will increase the speed at which we can find causes and therapies for these neurological disorders. Next slide. Our designs centre around an open and welcoming ground floor plan, challenging preconceptions of what a combined health and research facility might look like and what it might feel like. Providing publicly accessible social spaces, a cafe, shared gardens, exhibition and event spaces that all contribute to a civic ground condition. Creating spaces for enjoyment takes away the stigma of coming to a hospital and can reduce anxiety. Next slide, please. The image on the left shows the new route that we're creating through the heart of the site and connects to King's Cross Road. The image on the right shows the new entrance courtyard. This is where all three institutions are going to share a single entrance with the public, and that sets the tone for collaboration. Next slide. Our landscape design references traditional Bloomsbury squares, albeit in a contemporary manner. Simple and clear planning provides routes through quieter spaces, as well as opportunities to watch the world go by. Next slide. Continuing the theme of breaking down barriers, the internal arrangements have been designed to continuously focus the mind on collaboration. Next slide, please. So how do we catalyse collaboration? To begin with, we need to encourage patients to come to the centre. This means making it comfortable and non-institutional. Researchers also have to want to be there. The war for talent is very real in the science and research sector. Sharing space, facilities and services, irrespective of institutional and departmental boundaries, encourages discussion. It forms innovation and challenges the way that clinical and research processes are carried out. Next slide, please. Another shift in perspective is how we approach the built infrastructure of our future hospitals. The next generation of hospital environments need to be super flexible and highly agile. It's important to think beyond day one. This building will look at the cause of dementia at day one, but it will focus on cures, drug discovery, therapy, and possibly more in the future, which all come with very, very difficult technical demands. Next slide, please. Our new hospitals also have to shift their perspective towards user experience. Our designers, who are typically fit, healthy, and mobile, had to actually learn how to work with living with dementia. Dementia affects mobility, sensation, eyesight, and cognitive ability. Now, we could only really test the first 4 of those. All of the rest of them add to confusion and anxiety. Next slide, please. So how can we reduce that anxiety? Good lighting is absolutely essential. Making entrances clear and designing intuitive routes that don't rely on signage. Use of colour to identify departmental boundaries is pragmatic and cost effective. And making space for rest is absolutely essential. Views out and connections to green space not only reduce anxiety, but have also been proven to improve clinical outcomes. Next slide, please. One of my colleagues, Helena Howard, spearheaded research into how colour is perceived by people living with dementia and how the application of colour might actually reduce anxiety. Various illnesses change the way people perceive colour. The conclusion here being that tone and temperature of light are equally as important as the selection of colour. Colour and material palettes need to work in a coherent and purposeful way to subconsciously guide patients through spaces. Next slide, please. This approach makes for calm, homely, and legible spaces, far from institutional and full of light. What isn't shown here is that this consult room doubles as a therapy suite and a phlebotomy room, and could easily be reconfigured with its neighbour into a larger space if the clinical model changes in the future. Next slide. Finally, another shift in perspective. I thought I would share an image of the project in its current state. We're halfway through demolition, but we're working with our contractor ISG, and we remain on programme despite COVID-19's best efforts. And we look forward to welcoming you all in 2024. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuan, for taking us through this process. It was very interesting to hear all about it. Just a quick reminder for the audience, for anyone who has questions to our speakers, just to put them through the Q&A button, and we'll get to that later on. And now I'm going to introduce Kate Edmondson, Senior Architect at Payner & Prasad, who are going to present the project Oriole. So Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you for this opportunity to share Oriole today. Payner & Prasad have been working as lead architects alongside a design-led team at ACOM and with White Architecture for interiors and landscape. We have been working collaboratively on Project Oriole. Next. Oriole is a joint venture between Moorfields Eye Hospital, UCL Institute of Ophthalmology, and Moorfields Eye Charity, bringing together world-leading eye care, research, and education under one roof. The project is in planning at the moment, with the aim to complete by the end of 2025. Next slide, please. The client's vision is to create an environment for innovation to flourish, inspiring improvements in people's sight by harnessing the collective power of students and patients. The core belief that people's sight matters is at the heart of the project. Next. This statement of inclusion takes into account everyone's needs and varying degrees of sight capacity. We have to consider all patient age groups, as well as those living with dementia, disability, anxiety, or injury, and also users who may be neurodivergent or neurodegenerative. The focus on people is carried through to the project objectives on the next slide, with the aim of improving the experience of all users. The Oriole partners are already combining medicine, research, and education in a unique way, but there is a real need to design a new facility and environment to allow this work to work in a uniquely seamless way. Technology is also key to generate the benefits identified, and it's explored on the next slide. Advancements in technology will transform the delivery of eye care, as well as providing more efficient service delivery and building operations. This has a positive impact on space by allowing a smaller functional area and capacity to convert to digital consultations. Moorfields is at the cutting edge of developing new technology, but is currently within an outdated setting. Next. Moorfields has been situated at City Road, Old Street for over 120 years and partnered with the UCL for 20. The current services are co-located across several buildings on different sites. The new building will ensure integrated services within one hub and network services distributed to satellite sites. The more compact site promotes sharing resources between departments, allowing us to work on a smaller footprint. As we move on to the next slide, you'll see this is located to the northwest of St Pancras, near St Pancras Gardens, just over the canal and railway tracks from King's Cross. The St Pancras Hospital site is ideally situated close to the UCL Bloomsbury campus and several of the voluntary sector and charity partners, such as the RNIB. The new site is an area which has one of the highest densities of cultural and scientific institutes in the world, known as the Knowledge Quarter. As you can see on the next slide, it is really well connected, both for London and the rest of the UK, making it a far more accessible national centre for eye care and research combined. However, it is still a challenge to get to due to a variety of routes and the complex navigational issues with visual impairment. We are working with a wide range of stakeholder groups and Camden planners to develop the most effective wayfinding strategies for the diverse group of users. Technology will assist travel and movement through the public realm, with the digital and physical green line, making it integrated and inclusive. Next. We are working within 2 acres of the St Pancras Hospital site, with the adjoining scheme and area being led by another developer. This will be a coordinated approach with the emerging master plan to knit the 2 schemes together. Here we are creating new pedestrian thoroughfares and squares connecting to the surrounding area and local nodes of transport. Next. This public realm continues through the ground floor and introduces an accessible route through the building. This is arranged over 2 levels in order to address the existing level change across the site. It will have an open and accessible feel, providing a new public space for the city. There are education, art and exhibition spaces displaying the science and research happening within the building, and also a cafe. So going from the ground level up to the massing of the building on the next slide. The site is within the King's Cross Conservation Area and rapidly changing borough of Camden. There have been planning challenges as the site is tight for the accommodation required. There are heritage assets opposite, and the building has to mediate in scale between the existing and the new. We do this through a series of heights and setbacks, responding to the different contexts around the building. Next. At the centre of that massing is a core and atrium. It is a special set of places rising at the heart of the building, through which all users will pass to maximise cross-fertilisation. Everyone is brought together here. It's a place to gather, break out, meet, refresh, and mix with an informal setting. This symbolises the collaboration and integration that is the driver of the project. Next. And this is how it's being realised, drawing users into the atrium and up through the building to the main public circulation. The glazed roof brings daylight down and the bridges connect to the departments, wrapping the central core. The department floor plates on the next slide have been designed for now and for the future for change and flexibility. For example, surgery has the same floor plate and core as the admin department, but with a plant strategy to suit and designed to be demountable. The floor plates are adaptable and can change as clinical delivery patterns, patient services, and research needs change. Within the shell and core, next, the floor plates are flexible around the department anchors. These key departments are carefully fixed within the shell due to the necessary adjacencies and plant requirements. The functional areas are then structured around these anchors, as shown on the section next. The stacking of departments is planned for cross-disciplinary interaction, and the nature of integration was explored extensively with the end users. Due to COVID, the fit-out has been paused while the shell and core progressed. The sense of a shared environment is also reflected in the interior next. The overall look and feel for this clinical facility is for it to not feel clinical, to be more welcoming and more public by introducing natural materials, pockets of planting, and careful lighting throughout. And then externally, next. The public face of the building is playful and rigorous, with a palette of materials and colours in both sympathy and contrast to the historical context. This high-performing unitised facade is part of the project's commitment to sustainability. Next. To deliver a low-carbon and resource-efficient building, we have adopted the GLA's energy hierarchy of Be Lean, Be Clean, and Be Green. And in addition, the circular economy principles are embedded into the design. Next. So that a flexible shell and core form an adaptive building. We have designed in layers, designing out waste through prefabrication and pre-assembly, such as the unitised facade, and for disassembly, like the modular partitions and services, as well as considering change of use, for example, student accommodation or hotel in the future. And finally, next, we are responding to a brief that actively encourages bench to bedside, meaning from lab to theatre and beyond. This proposal for a truly collaborative place will help integrate the contributions of clinicians, researchers, and patients with the engagement of the public. The Oriole project is based on the belief that improving people's eyesight and health matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate, and great to learn more about the details of this scheme. And next we have Dominic Hook, Project Director at BDP, who will present the Oak Cancer Centre. Dominic, over to you.
Thanks, Barbara. Great to be here. Next slide, please. So I'm going to present to you a project which we've been working on since the summer of 2018. It's the Oak Cancer Centre for the Royal Marsden. Next slide, please. So for those of you that don't know, the Royal Marsden is a fantastic sort of hospital. It's actually the world's first hospital, opened in 1851. And I love this particular quote here. Now, gentlemen, I want to found a hospital for the treatment of cancer and for the study of the disease. For at the present time, we know absolutely nothing about it. So that effectively said, that set the vision right at the beginning. So it's a hospital, fantastic, is of international repute and currently ranked 3rd in the world, along with its adjoining institute, the Institute of Cancer Research. Next slide, please. So for those of you who don't know, the Royal Marsden has actually got 2 campuses, the red dot in the middle in central London on the Fulham Road. That's the kind of the original campus, but our project, the Oak Cancer Centre, is being built in Sutton on the South London. Next slide, please. So you can see here the overall red line boundary, the Royal Marsden towards the south. It's got a number of sort of notable neighbours. It was previously the former Sutton Hospital towards the north, some old sort of H-block workhouses, which was formerly owned by the Epsom and St Helier NHS Trust, is now Sutton, London Borough of Sutton Land. The research partner, Institute of Cancer Research, to the east. There's a new Maggie Centre designed by Abe Rogers, completed about 18 months ago, very nice scheme to the west. And then existing kind of Royal Marsden Hospital to the south. So our site is kind of right in the middle of all of that. On first appearances, it seemed like a rather kind of unpromising prospect. Next slide, please. Sort of rather nice in terms of the big green space towards the south is Banstead Common, Banstead Heath. But the building, I mean, pretty characteristic of a number of NHS sites, similar to Whipps Cross, very kind of unpromising on first appearances, lots of sort of single-storey buildings, organic development over a long period of time. Next slide, please. And it just seemed sort of really rather unpromising in terms of its initial outlook. And our brief was basically to develop a new cancer centre for patients who are obviously very ill and trying to create a really positive environment for them. So that was one of our challenges there. Next slide, please. What is interesting, however, is that our site is right in the sort of the epicentre in a way of an area which has been kind of coined as the London Cancer Hub. So great sort of ambition for this whole area, effectively almost creating, like with St Pancras around the Francis Crick, UCLH, etc., a new London knowledge cluster, but the idea of actually centering that around kind of cancer research particularly. Next slide, please. So again, very unpromising site, initially full of all sorts of constraints in there, notably in red, kind of hatched all the below ground services, etc. So our kind of challenge was to kind of develop a kind of a world-class, 21st century clinical care and research centre for the Royal Marsden, and to try and make sense without it being compromised by the short-term constraints of a kind of existing buildings and existing kind of services challenges, etc. Next slide, please. And including a kind of a quite significant level change across the site, which actually we thought was a positive thing in many ways, and which we seek to kind of capitalise on, because it lent itself to the prospect of actually creating kind of 2 entrances, which was useful to realise the brief on this site. Next slide, please. So in terms of engagement and collaboration, all of these projects that have a significant amount of them, I won't go through any of these in detail, but a significant amount of engagement collaboration with the Trust and numerous clinicians, and it's still ongoing. So it goes in from the macro to the micro, down to the level of detail, and everybody I'm sure has a really strong sense of that kind of the intensity of that process. So next slide, please. So we kind of gradually in collaboration kind of whittle down the options, and next slide, please. In a way, this is sort of in a nutshell trying to sort of summarize the essence of it, really. So it's a building, it's largely replacement accommodation, but it pretty much sort of the existing accommodation is in a pretty poor state, unfortunately. So some of it is effectively rehousing, for instance, the outpatient department, etc., and the chemotherapy daycare department, but obviously kind of seeking to take the advantage of the opportunity to actually to really bring it into the 21st century. I think the really key thing was the idea of embedded research being an important part of the brief. And one of the key things, there's a feasibility that was in place before we even started, the idea of actually the building was a layer cake of clinical at the bottom and research that tucked away, but we were very much of the idea of actually really embedding that into the scheme, showcasing it, so it had a really strong presence within the scheme. As I mentioned here, in terms of actually, and we've got 2 ground levels, an upper ground level and a lower ground level. And we were seeking to take advantage of that by streaming the patients, because there are effectively is an entrance for patients who are sick and for patients who are not sick. Those who have yet to be diagnosed, they may have had a referral from their GP, and there was a desire from the trust to actually kind of create a bit of a distinction between those entrances. Next slide, please. So a drawing summarising the essence of the concept. Effectively, as I was saying, the challenging site, numerous constraints, but one of the only kind of really positive things that we thought we could kind of latch onto was some rather nice mature trees, and actually in the foreground. So we very much kind of orientated some of the key parts of the scheme towards that sort of, rather wonderful natural landscape. Interestingly, I haven't got time to go into it, but actually there's some rather nice copper beech trees immediately adjacent to the site, sort of rather majestic. But as it transpired, it would have cost about £500,000 to actually retain them. So most of the garden is effectively a new garden, but it still plays a very important part in actually kind of forming the centre point, the kind of the focal point for some of the key internal spaces, certainly. Next slide, please. So just kind of quickly rattling through the kind of the internal content of the scheme. So the lower ground level is this RDAC entrance there. That's the Rapid Diagnostic Centre. So it's basically where patients would actually get a referral to establish actually whether they need further treatment. Next slide, please. And the upper ground level, this is the main kind of outpatient department. So relatively simple configuration of consult examination rooms, wrapping around a kind of perimeter, sort of clear and sort of welcoming main entrance space leading into a kind of a public or waiting atria space for the outpatients, and the outpatients wrapping all the way around that, and the distinction between the general outpatients and the hematology oncology outpatients as well. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, the embedded research, the space for 300 sort of dry lab researchers, and very much actually having that visible kind of sandwich in between the layers. Next slide, please. And this is one of the most important parts of the scheme, actually the kind of the crescent towards the front, orientated towards the natural landscape. There's 63 chemotherapy daycare infusion bays, effectively, where people are having chemo treatment, and they're kind of arranged in clusters of 3. And the idea is actually that they all kind of are largely focused and orientated to the best aspect of the scheme. Moving up, please. And then a series of mixture of spaces. The scheme also includes a rooftop restaurant space here. And this is actually a restaurant for the staff, for the entire campus. So it's actually a really important part as a place. They haven't currently got a provision of such space at the moment. And they have an ability to actually break out into a sort of rather nice terrace space. Next slide, please. And actually rather interesting, which got topped in a way by a kind of a conference space, meeting room, almost penthouse space as such, which is interesting because it made actually kind of creating a prominent corner on the approach towards the site. But actually we were also prompted by the local planners to actually to make greater advantage of the development potential of the site by actually rising higher. It's the first time in my career that the planners have been pushed for a higher scheme on the site. Next slide, please. And in essence, in terms of the flexibility, there's a simple scheme that sits behind it. Really, it could be reconfigured into a variety of uses. So the main grey space, 15-metre deep plan, 7.5-metre grid can be reconfigured into a variety of different functions in due course, potentially even inpatient accommodation, and a kind of flexible sort of crescent of space running along the front on the western elevation. Next slide, please. And just generally quickly rattling through, conscious of time, the main entrance approach on the left, the lower ground entrance to the Rapid Diagnostic, the main entrance seen through the garden space, the main entrance leading you in towards there, sort of baffling the sunlight on the western expanse, but while still actually enjoying kind of a positive connection to the garden for the daycare area. Next one, please. And the main entrance reception space, which leads you straight through towards the outpatient kind of atrium, or the waiting space with the wrap of flexible accommodation around it. The central kind of public core, which kind of connects all of the levels and making the wayfinding orientation very intuitive. Next slide, please. And the daycare area I mentioned, so actually arranged in kind of clusters of 3, similar in a way. Oh, I'm on time. Okay. Running out of time, we almost kind of strike the parallel with actually an airline. You've actually got a window seat or actually an aisle seat, with the idea of actually kind of creating a sort of a special space as such where patients can actually trying to make this as positive an experience as possible. Next slide, please. And actually next one. And the overall sweep of the daycare infusion bays. level 2 and looking out towards the new garden. And just out of interest, as I suppose, so this building is on site at the moment. It's due to complete summer next year. And we're actually also at the moment, this is ESTH, Epsom St Helier Trust. We're building a new specialist emergency care hospital, which will be complete in 2025. I think I'm over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominic, for this presentation. Just before our final presentation, another reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, just put them through the Q&A function. We already see there's a few coming through. And now our last speaker, Hugo Dring, Associate Director of Bureau 4, will be presenting the UCL Institute of Immunity and Transplantation. So Hugo, over to you.
Great, thank you, Barbara. Yeah, I'm going to talk to you today about the Pears building, which we're building for the Royal Free charity, and this will house the new home for UCL's Institute of Immunity and Transplantation, which is currently in the neighbouring Royal Free Hospital building, which is right next door to our site. If you go to the next slide, please. So Bureau 4 were appointed back in 2014, and the brief of what our client wanted to achieve was to provide a world-class research organisation in the heart of London to deliver groundbreaking research, medical research advances. So this building will have a number of uses. It will house the UCL's new IIT, the Royal Free Charity's new office, patient accommodation, and the car park. And I've taken these two statements here from UCL's website, IIT website, where their mission is to be an international centre of excellence for immunity research to improve human health, with a vision to discover disease-causing immune mechanisms and use this knowledge to develop new immunotherapies, which I think are two very poignant statements here, and this building will go a long way to help benefit a number of us and our relatives, and is a very significant project to be delivering. If we go on to the next slide, please. A bit more information about the stakeholders involved. So our direct client is the Royal Free charity. They are heavily involved in the Royal Free Hospital, and offer patient services there. So if you ever go to the hospital, you'll see a lot of Royal Charity staff helping out in the hospital. The Royal Free London Trust essentially manage the hospital and the estate, and our building is actually on their land. And then we've got University College London, which is a world-leading university, and has been mentioned a number of times in this presentation today already. And they have part of their teaching medical school within the hospital next door, and has a number of renowned medical academics within. Go on to the next slide, please. So to put it into context of where the site is, so it's right next to the Royal Free Hospital, busy hospital, and it's in the sort of leafy suburb of Hampstead in North London, near Belsize Park Underground Station, Hampstead Heath Overground Station. Our site is here on the right. It was previously a car park for the hospital, sort of 2 stories or so, which had fallen into disrepair, and the level above was a green space where people could sit and reflect after visiting relatives, relatives in hospital, and was a sort of a relaxation space. And this is the area that our client undertook to redevelop. Go on to the next slide, please. So use of the building, the use of the land, working very hard here. So we've got patient car park, bottom 2 levels, Royal Free Charity office, UCL lab space over 3 floors, and this is containment level 2 and containment level 3 with write-up space, and then patient accommodation within the same building. So I think that's the key bit here. It's a patient-focused research facility, and that's all about making it speeding up the process to getting these progressing the research and then getting the results of that out into the market, and making us all benefit from those. If we go on to the next slide, please. So many years ago, this is the concept of the building, and written or drawn by Hopkins Architects. And you can see here it's all about collaboration. Nice big open spaces, nice big atrium. Right up here is all open plan. There's very few offices apart from for the professors, and it's all about being able to see colleagues on other floors, going down to visit them, bouncing off ideas off them, chance encounters, creating a high performing environment to speed up medical research. There's pods within the atrium that cantilever out. There's seminar space in the bottom. There's teaching space, cafe area, and let's say patient accommodation above that. So it's all about speed, speeding up, getting vaccines and medical treatments out to the wider population. We go on to the next slide, please. So touched on the uses earlier, but here's sort of further design info of what was originally planned. So level 00 car park and the Royal Free Charity office. It's not as harsh as it sounds having an office down there. The site's actually on a very steep slope. So to the bottom of the page, I suppose that's all in darkness, but to the north or to the top of the page, that's all nice light space, and it's a very pleasant area for the charity's office. Car parking above, and then we get to essentially the entrance floor on level 2. So very grand entrance where the atrium is, UCL's lab space to the south of our building. And then UCL have their own terrace entertainment space, garden area, and then there's the replacement Heath Strange garden there, which replaces what was previously there on top of the car park. And then going up the building, we get into more of the UCL spaces, which is this containment level 2 labs right up with offices, same on level 4, where the CL3 lab is also. And then we get into the patient accommodation floors. So it's basically the patients could stay there and go down, have their treatments, and then go back up. But it's also for doctors visiting the hospital. They can use that as opposed to staying off site and then having to travel to the hospital. And then we've got the roof area, which as roofs goes, quite a smart roof, in that there's not actually a lot of plant visible on there. The plants all sort of cut in to these sort of green areas highlighted on levels 5 and 6. So it's quite neat within the same footprint of the building. It's all cut in there, so that's quite smart. If we go on to the next slide, please. So plan view. So the hospital is right there to the top of the page here, and managing that during construction has been very challenging. This is the Has Road that you see here, going into the hospital to the heart attack centre. So having our site entrance and sharing that with the ambulances has been very challenging, and our contractor Wilmot Dixon have managed that extremely well with their logistics, and it also being a residential area, they've got a very strict process in place to make sure we don't have lorries queued up around Hampstead, which wouldn't have gone down well at all. Looking at the plan here, it's all nice big green area to replace the green space that was there previously. So lots of trees, greenery, and providing a very positive environment for the scientists to work in. And you'll see there to the bottom of the page, that's Hampstead Heath Green, which is a protected meadow. Again, provides a positive space to look out onto. And as a building, I think it's quite quirky as opposed to just having a rectangle building. It's got a kink in it, which just adds extra character. And walking down the corridors now, you can see the curvature of the building, which is, it's very impressive. It's a fantastic design. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So I was asked to mention some of the challenges we had. So the first challenge we encountered was planning. It took a long time to get through. It's quite a controversial building, I suppose, compared to what was there previously, in that it was a low-storey car park replaced by a 7-storey building. But with work with Camden Council and the residents, we managed to get that through, and with a complicated 106 room, but that's been managed positively over the last few years. Design, being a complicated building, lots of different uses, has been very challenging. And along with the multi-stakeholders, that's taken a lot of hard work from our design team, and contractor, but we've got there, and it all works very well. And delivery has been very challenging also, so I've been asked to hurry up here. So I'll go on to the next slide, please. So current status, these are currently what it looks like. I think it looks fantastic compared to the CGIs, and you see the atrium space there. You can imagine the sort of cross-pollination of ideas between scientists, and you see the CLT lab space there, which I think is very, very smart. So get on to the next slide, please. So to summarize, collaborative state-of-the-art facility, clinical research trials will be on the same site with patient accommodation. That's all to promote the efficiency. On track to achieve BREEAM excellent, and completion will be Q2 this year. And I think there might be one more slide. Yeah, and this is the project team here. So thank you very much. And I think we're on to questions now.
Thank you so much, Hugo. And thanks everyone for this amazing range of projects that we hear today. We do have some questions now coming through, and I think we have about 4 minutes to go through. So I'll try to combine a few of them. And I think there's one that's recurring, and I think it's kind of bring together some of the things that we've heard today about the integration of the schemes within the urban realm and the connection with the public space. And that's Juliet, who's asking what opportunities might be there for hospitals in general to interact with the high street, and how can large numbers of employees and visitors help activate urban area, regeneration area. So is there anyone who wants to start with that? Maybe Eleni, do you want to share your comments?
Yeah, very, very good question. And actually it's a very valid point, especially at the time of this pandemic where the streets and town centers are completely deserted. In my opinion, I think it's really important to start reactivating and engaging the general public with healthcare buildings. There is a sense of anxiety and with patients visiting hospital buildings or healthcare facilities. So we've heard about it today. And actually creating more inviting ground floor areas and being able to have visibility in and out of the building would actually regenerate a lot of these high streets, possibly with smaller medical centers in the future. It's a good solution to the issues we're facing.
Yeah, and Kate, do you want to maybe chip in on that? And I think there's another question directed to you that kind of linked to that, but also with the wider sort of how do you negotiate the space with different users? And do you want to give your opinion on that?
Yeah, sure. Totally in agreement with Eleni there, and the idea that bringing people to these buildings, whether they are the visitors, the patients, or the clinicians, will activate the spaces, and we can do that, and we can support that through the design and making spaces welcoming, and also giving over space that can be part of maybe retail or cafe, so that there is a mix, and that enlivens a space and also provides kind of that civic quality that you get with healthcare buildings. I did also see the question about the atrium, and our atrium is I guess the focus of the building, and it's the place where everybody comes to and can cut through, and that has obviously put with it some challenges, but we are very carefully reviewing the lighting, the acoustics, and we're modeling it to make sure that it works with the daylight and the shadows. And the Oriole is the kind of central circulation core, so patients and visitors will use it as lifts and stairs. And as you go up the building, there are waiting spaces and receptions to the departments on the floors. And then at the upper levels, it's used as workspace and breakout space. So it's a real mix, and that will help encourage the kind of cross collaboration between all the users.
Thank you. And does anyone wants to comment on this aspect? No. Okay, I think we are almost up to time, and we didn't have time to go through all the other questions, but we will circulate them to the speakers, so we will get the opportunity to respond to our audience on that. So thank you again for all these amazing presentations and these great projects. We will now have a short poll with the audience just to ask some feedback about today's session, which is really useful for us to program future events. I think it has been a very informative session, and we'll certainly revisit this theme later on in the year. And thank you again for our speakers and for watching.